All right, let's quickly go over the answers to the worksheet just in case you need them. This is stuff that you will need. As we go through this, I'm going to tell you which parts are important to know for this week's quiz and which parts you do not need to know for the quiz. The textbook worksheet oftentimes goes into a lot of detail about things that, well, I think actually are kind of trivial. So let's take a quick look at this. Gregor Mendel experimented with hundreds of pea plants to understand the process of, what's the answer? Heredity. Guys, let's go through this quickly, okay? Match the term with its definition. Heredity is the passing of traits to parents to offspring. Genetics is scientific study, and traits are physical characteristics. Okay, now this question right here, I gave you yesterday as a freebie. This I will not answer. I will not ask you on the quiz. This gets into a lot more detail about plant reproduction, which we will talk about when we get to the spring. But the correct answer, the female sex cells are produced by the female part of the plant, which is called the pistil. The pollen, the male part, is produced by the stamen. And they just put this in here because it explains how Mendel could control the reproduction, and so that's why they put it there. Okay, purebred, which we will talk about. Purebred organisms are what? Okay, and so purebred organisms are the ones that Mendel called true breeding. So generation after generation, you see the same traits. And what Mendel found out, and the way he expressed it later, is that you have two of the same allele for a trait, like big T, or little t. Now, when we talk about a purebred horse or a purebred dog, that's very different than just having the same alleles for one trait. And in fact, next week, we will have a different word for just having the same alleles for one trait, as opposed to the whole organism being what we call purebred. All right, next, the next page is this. Okay, and again, this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, just going through the experiment that Mendel did. So Mendel's experiment here, we see this again. This is just going step by step over what we already talked about. So purebred tall are crossed with purebred short. Offspring are all tall. They self-pollinate. The offspring are tall and short. Okay? Piece of cake. Question? Well, for the quiz, I mean, I'm not going to ask you specifically what Mendel studied, but you do need to understand what he did in his experiments. More importantly, you need to know, how does a Punnett square work, right? So here's another one, and this one, this is going into a tremendous amount of deal about his pea plants. You know what? I'm not going to ask you about all these different crazy traits, right? The correct answers are B and C. The two forms of seed shape are round and wrinkled. But I'm not going to ask you what the traits are. If I give you a Punnett square, I will say, in pea plants, the two traits are round and wrinkled. And I'll tell you which one's dominant. And then I'll ask you to do a Punnett square, right? So don't worry about these. You do not need to know these ones. Alleles are forms of a gene, and the dominant always shows up if the dominant allele is present. In pea plants, only pea plants with two recessive alleles will show the short trait. True. Right? Yes. You know what? We're going to talk about that a little bit next week in terms of what the letters would be. So don't worry about that for right now. But basically, the short answer is the letters always go with the dominant trait. So if round is dominant, then the letters would be big R and little r. But we are going to talk about that more next week. Okay. Back. Sorry about that. We lost our thing here. Okay, so again, this is asking the specific question, but again, you should understand purebred short would have, and actually people would have confused what we did is we did this. Short stem would be little t, one each, big T, little t. Right. Then it's easy to match it up. Purebred short, purebred tall, hybrid tall. Okay. Dominant represented by a capital letter, and recessive by a lowercase. And then here they're asking you the same question again. One allele for tall, one allele for short. This question I will not ask you. It's kind of a trick question, but it was actually in the reading if you actually read all of it. In his time, people did not really fully appreciate what Mendel was doing, right? And in his time, they wouldn't say, oh, you are the father of modern genetics, because modern genetics hadn't really been developed yet. That's something we say in retrospect. So, of course, in their time, they didn't say, what you're doing now is going to be really important someday. This worksheet, again, it's kind of reviewing what you just did. But as you know, this is tricky stuff. So here we are going once again through Mendel's experiment. What trait are they clearly studying here? What trait are they studying? Height. What are the two different alleles or the two different options for height? Tall and short. Which one's dominant? How do you know that's dominant? Well, but you don't know that from the picture? How do you know that tall is dominant looking at this? Right. Okay. The two ways you know is that one is it shows up more often. But the more important way you know is that when you crossed a tall and a short, you got all tall. Okay? Same thing with recessive. The short's recessive because it got covered up. And what alleles do the F1 offspring have? You know that they have big T, little t because they pass on the little t. Okay. What? Oh, I just didn't finish writing it. Recessive. I was just saying that it occurs more often. The tall occurs more often. Okay, now for the good stuff. You did this. You do need to know these words for this week. These are words you need to know that you will see on the quiz, right? I will not use these exact definitions, but this would be a good way to do it. Question or answer? All right. I think the easiest way to do this is backwards like this. The passing of traits from parent to offspring is heredity. An organism with two different alleles for a trait. Hybrid. Factors that control traits. Genes. Physical characteristics of an organism. Traits. An allele whose trait always shows up if that allele is present. Dominant. The different forms of a gene. Alleles. That's just tricky. The different forms of a gene, and they give it a name you've never heard of before. The scientific study of heredity is genetics. And last of all, it's masked, if you don't have two of them, would be recessive. Now, let me tell you something about real important here. It gets a little confusing sometimes when you look at genetics or heredity. Mendel studied heredity. He technically didn't study genetics because he had no idea what genes were. Heredity, as you see in the word, is studying inheritance. And then genetics is studying genes. Question. So if you read all those crazy directions, it's basically saying that the short hair is recessive, or short hair is dominant, long hair is recessive, and what can you tell? So we're basically going to do the Punnett square only backwards here. So here's the big question. You know that this one has the recessive trait. You know that it's little h because it has long hair. You can't display the recessive trait unless you have little h. Then the parent, this parent, has short hair. So we know that this parent has at least one dominant trait, correct? Okay, but the question is, so what could this cat be? It could be either big H, or big H, little h. Guys, I'm going over this. This is the most common problem that people get wrong. So the question is, which one is it? Well, check this out. Here's how you can find out. You know that, and this is called a test cross, if the scientists wanted to know what genetics a short-haired cat had, you could mate it with something that you know the genetics of and see what the offspring are. So we know that the one cat has little h, and this guy has big H something. So we can figure this out, big H, big H, right? But check this out. We know that one of the kittens is little h. So what does that tell you? No, it's not purebred, he's hybrid. Now, some people were confused because the test cross we did before, the parent generation were all purebred. But the parent generation doesn't have to be purebred. Now, there's another confusing thing here, isn't there? Right. What's confusing about this here? So as you look at this, although the Punnett square predicts a 50-50 probability, we know that you couldn't pass on this trait if you didn't have it here. So even though it came out 3-to-1, which makes it look like something it's not, it's just the probability. In the same way that you could flip a coin 10 times, you could get 9 heads. It's possible, it's not probable. It's more likely you'll get something closer to 50-50. You could, and this would really mess with your data, you could, if you mated these two cats, you could have a litter that every single kitten was long hair. That would really mess with you. You would think that maybe the long hair was dominant. But it's just, it's unlikely, but it's possible. Okay? So with that, let's take a quick look at these other answers and see if you have other questions. Yes? The long-haired cat is purebred because you have to have purebred to get the recessive trait. The short-haired cat we know is hybrid because otherwise it couldn't pass on that recessive trait. The short cat were purebred. What would you expect the offspring to look like? They'd have all short hair. And oh dear, now they've given us another one. In horses, black is dominant over brown. Black horse and a brown horse produces a brown foal. Is the parent hybrid or purebred? Okay, hang on. A black horse and a brown horse produces brown, which is the recessive. Is the parent, the black horse parent, is it dominant or recessive? Or is it dominant? Purebred or hybrid? It's hybrid. It has to be hybrid or it couldn't pass on the brown trait. Okay? Do the Punnett square. It's the exact same problem. Okay? And then this is the exact same thing. In guinea pigs, the smooth coat is dominant over the rough coat. And so you have the smooth coat guinea pig, and you don't know if it's hybrid or purebred. How do you find the answer? By mating it with one that only has the recessive trait, right? Well, we don't know. It didn't tell you what the offspring were, but that's how you could find out.